Welcome to our webinar live stream, The Rise of Recurring Giving, Strategies for 2025 and Beyond, sponsored by Charity Engine. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan, and I'll be the operator for the presentation today. We are joined today by our speaker, Dave Raley. Dave is the founder of Imago Consulting, an advisory firm that helps organizations create growth through innovation. As a speaker and advisor, he has inspired thousands of nonprofit leaders to grow both personally and organizationally. He's the author of The Rise of Sustainable Giving, How the Subscription Economy is Transforming Recurring Giving and What Nonprofits Can Do to Benefit. At this time, I would like to turn the microphone over to our sponsor and moderator, Dave Martin, to begin today's webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Dave Martin. I am the Vice President of Marketing at Charity Engine, and we're sponsoring this webinar. We're so excited to be partnering with Dave Raley today. And what's so interesting is that the last we heard, there's over 1,800 registrants for this webinar, and it's the #1 AFP webinar since the pandemic. So we know that this topic is resonating. Clearly, it's resonating. And we love at Charity Engine, we love partnering with thought leaders and marrying that methodology with technology. And we believe and know that Charity Engine has the best software in the market that helps you gain and retain sustainers. Before I jump into a little bit about us, we have a book giveaway today. Dave is going to be, this presentation is like a sneak peek of his book that's coming out shortly, and I'm going to let him talk about that, so I won't take up too much of it. But we're going to be giving away 100 books today for free that we're going to ship to you. You're going to see a link in the chat, and click on that link, fill in your mailing information, and we're going to pick 100 lucky winners to get the book. So please do that. So who's Charity Engine? 30 seconds here. We're an all-in-one nonprofit CRM. We have every fundraising tool that you need to do your fundraising for your organization, whether it's major gifts or volunteers or sustainers or events, payment processing, email, marketing automation, all of that, peer-to-peer campaigns you might run. So all of your data and your tools are in one place. And it's one scalable platform to learn. You don't have to leave our platform and go to another one when you outgrow it. And lastly, we're 100% privately owned and self-funded. We believe really strongly in that. There's a lot of organizations that aren't privately owned, that may be backed by big banks that might steer them in a certain direction. We're steered in the direction of supporting all the nonprofits out there in the best fundraising they can do. So that's my one thing there. And the other part is around part of our product is called Sustainer IQ. It is subscription billing technology for nonprofits. And we're so confident as other CRMs that use e-commerce payment tools that are recurring billing on a monthly basis. Our subscription billing technology, we can guarantee up to 90% a monthly donation collection rate. Now, the industry average is somewhere from 70 to 80%. And when you talk about even small 50 sustainers up to thousands, it can make a huge impact on your bottom line and the amount of revenue that you're generating on a monthly basis. So that's all I have so far. And we're really happy to have Dave speaking here. He's fantastic. And I'm going to let Dave take it from here.
Thank you, Dave. By the way, great, strong name. I really like that.
The best.
No, I've been watching the chat, and it's so cool to see where everyone's from. I see some warmer places than I am. I'm based in Seattle, Washington. Grew up originally in Southern California, but it's a little chilly today. So excited to be with you all and just share some of how I think charities candidly have an unprecedented opportunity to take advantage of the subscription economy to raise more recurring giving. And especially in light of, we were just talking about as we were getting ready for this, of just what's been happening even with recent government grants. I think my social feed is filled with a lot of activity around the importance of diversification. And I think, this topic was timely before today, but it certainly is even more timely today. So as Ryan, our host, mentioned, I founded a company years ago called Imago Consulting. And what we do at Imago Consulting is basically work with charitable organizations to help them figure out how to grow. And we do that a lot through what I talk about as sustainable innovation, recurring giving, those sorts of things. But I'm also the author of a weekly column that's called the Wave Report, and that is trends and opportunities for leaders to grow themselves and their organization. And so I write on topics like certainly subscription giving and recurring giving, but also artificial intelligence, leadership, culture, and essentially innovation. I'm also the co-host and co-founder of the Purpose and Profit podcast, and we every episode we talk about the ideas at the intersection of causes and brands, what we can learn from the world of businesses like Disney, like we've had guests on from Oreo cookies and Pizza Hut and Chick-fil-A and Blockbuster and a lot of different brands. And we ask the question, what can we learn as nonprofit leaders? And then vice versa, what can charities teach the world of brands? And so we've had folks on from Compassion International, Charity Water, International Justice Mission. And Imago Consulting, the reason, by the way, I use Latin in our company name is because Imago is a vision of a future that does not yet exist, but will be. Literally in Latin, imago, an example of an imago would be a butterfly, right? It's the future and final form of a thing. And so one of the things I feel blessed to be able to do is to help organizations and leaders see a future that does not yet exist, but will be. So that brings us perfectly to the book and the topic we're going to hit on today. And so excited, so thrilled, by the way, when the team was telling us that this was the highest, most popular webinar, candidly, since the pandemic. I was thrilled. And candidly, I think this is the reason why, is because we're facing a generosity crisis in North America. We have fewer individuals giving to charities before, more dollars. But at the same time, there has been a trend underneath the surface, and I've wanted to call attention to it. And so I've spent the last 3 years doing research, conducting a national sustainer study, combining that with the 20 years of fundraising experience that I have to help leaders understand not just what the opportunity is, but how to take advantage of it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. By the way, the book, as Dave just said, the team at Charity Engine have 100 copies, which is so awesome. The book releases officially on next Tuesday as we're recording this. That's February 4th. And I just got a text from our publisher that it is officially the #1 hot new release in nonprofit organizations and charities. And so I'm incredibly humbled by that. I've put hundreds of hours into this thing. And so I do hope it makes a difference in the sector. So let's jump in. I want to ask you a question. What if you viewed an old practice in a new light? And in the chat, I would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of when you hear the word subscription? And I've got 2 screens here, so I'm going to try to jump over to the chat so I can follow along. What are some things that come to mind? Oh, and thank you for the love, by the way, on the book. What are some things that come to mind when you think of subscription? When I do this at events, I often hear, like, well, do you mean like my old magazine subscription? You know, what are some things that come to mind when you hear subscription? All right, monthly, reliable, radio, ease, set it and forget it. Yeah, Jaylee, I get it. Recurring, predictable, absolutely. Netflix, locked in. Valerie, thank you for your honesty. Money, wow. Okay, trying to keep up with the chat is fun. Magazines, but I'm old school. Rose, me too. Can't cancel. Yeah. You get a lot of connotations when you think about subscriptions in the world today, both good, by the way, and bad. And I think we can learn from both of those in the subscription world in terms of recurring giving. You know what I think of when I think of subscriptions? This little guy. Does anyone remember Reader's Digest? Does anyone still, I'm going to pull over to the chat. Does anyone still subscribe to Reader's Digest? Yeah, old school magazines. Yeah. So I remember as a child of the 80s growing up, my mother would get Reader's Digest every month. And I think I was more excited about it than she was. I would grab it and I would always just love flipping through it, the different stories, human interest stories. For those of you that are younger, Reader's Digest is a periodical subscription. And if you didn't have the Reader's Digest, just as an example, how would you know how to, I don't know, get over hiccups, for example? I mean, my 14-year-old asks me that question all the time. And my favorite section, by the way, of Reader's Digest growing up was right in the middle of each magazine, and it was a section called Word Power. Does anybody remember Word Power? It looked a little bit like this. It had usually about 15 really obscure words, and there was always these multiple choice, and you had to like guess what the word meant. And I just loved word power. Little did I know, a few decades later, I would actually consider myself a writer, but I just was so fascinated by words and what the right word was for the right moment. So why are we talking about Reader's Digest? And I think the chat said it. The reality is that subscriptions are not new. This is not a new phenomenon. Reader's Digest at its height, I think, had 120 million periodical subscribers, and neither is recurring giving. But the truth is, and the reason that I wrote the book and that we're talking today is because there are several factors that are happening that we can take advantage of. So, just a brief history of recurring giving. If we look back, actually, the earliest examples of recurring giving date back several thousand years to the ancient Jewish people and a practice that they had at their time that they called first fruits. And it was this idea that if you were a farmer or if you were a shepherd, you would bring the first 10%, the tithe, the first fruit, to the priest, which was the central, essentially, authority. And then those goods would then be distributed to the poor, the widows, the orphans. And so, in reality, in human history, recurring giving has been around for thousands of years. If we look at more modern history, fast forward several thousand years, the first recurring giving program in sort of the modern era was in 1698, and it was in London. And I want to read this by the SPCK. And it was Anglican parishes that would circulate what they called, and I'm not making this up, forms of subscription, asking donors for a, quote, modest payment at 4 set times a year, through which even small donors could contribute to establishing a local charity school. If we fast forward another 100 years or so, people think about recurring giving in the U.S. as this relatively modern phenomenon. Maybe it's in the last century. The reality is recurring giving in the U.S. is almost as old as the country itself. The very first program that ever existed was a group of missionaries in Bombay, India. They proposed this idea of donors, quote unquote, sponsoring children while they lived in residential homes and schools. And after a couple of months, after starting this program, the organization wrote that the plan was, quote, very captivating, and I'll quote, contributions and communal subscriptions for this object exceed our most sanguine expectations. By the way, at which point I had to look up the word sanguine because words, because I didn't know what that meant. By the way, sanguine means optimistic or positive. So the communal subscription for this object exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Enough about history. The reality, though, is that recurring giving is not new. I want to take you fast forward to the mid 2000s. The very first charity that I ever had the opportunity of working with was Union Rescue Mission in Los Angeles. If you are familiar with Union Rescue Mission, they're the oldest rescue mission in LA, and they're one of the largest social services organizations in the country. And it was close to home for me personally, literally, because I grew up in Southern California. And the reality was that the situation in LA was just extraordinarily difficult. I would spend nights at the mission, sleeping on their fifth floor, and just so discouraging, honestly, to see the reality of what was happening. And the work of URM was so critical to partnering with and working with people. And at that time, the very first program that I ever worked on 20 years ago was a recurring giving program. It was this idea of a meal a day program. And there were two things that were going on. Number one, the face of homelessness was really changing in LA. A lot of folks tended to think of the homeless as the, old grizzled veteran on the corner or the addict. And the reality was that more than half of the guests that were coming to Union Rescue Mission were women, children, and families. They were folks like Sarah, who I got to meet and spend some time with. Sarah had fled domestic violence. She was a single mom. Her and her son Elijah were unable to make ends meet at that time. This was a while ago in Los Angeles County. You had to work, I think, like 3 full-time minimum wage jobs to be able to make ends meet and have a minimum standard of living. So Union Rescue Mission had partnered alongside Sarah to help her son Elijah. They had a facility called Hope Gardens Family Center, and this was an opportunity for Sarah to get help with resume and ability to do interviews, for Elijah to have childcare, and for them to get some stability before they moved back out on their own. And so this was really close to my heart. But the other thing that I remember being very discouraged by, candidly, was how much work recurring giving was for a rescue mission at that time. I remember, printing out the 30, 90, 60, 90-day lapse letters and not being able to, and just how much work it was, but also just candidly, the fact that it was such a small percentage of the organization's revenue. And I just, at that time, felt like there was such a big opportunity to grow recurring giving. Little did I know that would become a core part of what we would be doing today. So as we bridge into talking about how we can take advantage of this, I want to see if you can find your organization in this next little bit. There have historically been 3 kinds of sustainer programs, and I want you to see if you can spot yourself in one of these. The first type of recurring giving program historically has been what I would call one-to-one recurring giving. And that is where the donor and the beneficiary are paired up in some way. So think of your classic, maybe child sponsorship or missionary sponsorship or staff support types of programming, where the donor gives, but there's a specific beneficiary that they either know literally because they've met them, or they have been paired up with that beneficiary via the nonprofit. Now, if you can do a one-to-one program, that's wonderful. This has really historically been the gold standard of recurring giving programs. But there's a problem. And the problem is that the vast majority of recurring giving programs are not conducive to a one-to-one type of a model. Programs, privacy concerns, logistical issues. And so the vast majority of charities have not been able to tap into this one-to-one model. The next type of recurring giving historically has been what I would call membership. And that is where the donor is at least partially the beneficiary of the goods and services that the programs and services that the organization provides. So think of your local zoo or museum or aquarium or arts institution, public television, public radio. There's a lot of charities today that exist to create programming and content and books and broadcasts. Those all provide some benefit to their donors. And if you do that, then one of the most powerful ways of building a recurring giving program is through membership. But once again, there's a problem, and that is the vast majority of charities do not have the programming and services that directly benefit donors. And so they cannot access the idea of membership recurring giving. That brings us to our third category historically, and that's the category that Union Rescue Mission was in, and that is literally everybody else. My estimate is that 75% of charities are in this third category. They don't have the ability to build a one-to-one recurring giving program where they can pair donors and beneficiaries. They don't provide any sort of direct or indirect benefits to their donors, and so they can't do membership. And they literally have, candidly, for the last several thousand years, been left behind. And I estimate, as I said, that's about 75% of charities. So The vast majority of nonprofits have not been able to historically build large, growing, recurring giving programs. That 75%, if you look at the charities in the US today, represents 1.1 million nonprofits today that have historically not been able to access strong, growing, recurring, resilient programs. So, what about you? Let me flip over to the chat here. I would love to hear what category would you see your charity in? One-to-one, membership, or everyone else? Melissa, I see it in the everyone else category. Who else? Let's see if my chat one-to-one. I see some questions. If you have questions, by the way, put those in the chat. We're going to do some Q&A here at the end, also in the everyone else. Yeah. I see a lot of membership. Everyone else. Okay, great. Okay. Yep. That's about right. More than 75% of the chat is saying everyone else.
They're coming in fast, Dave.
And it's coming in fast. Hard to keep up. So the good news is no matter which category you're in, the subscription economy and the patterns in donor behavior have been shifting so that this is an opportunity for you. So let me briefly describe two trends that are driving the rise of sustainable giving, and then we're going to go into some practical, what do we do in 2025? The first trend, no surprise, is subscriptions. The reality is that subscriptions are everywhere. Are you a subscriber? This is a fun little chat moment. So I would love to hear in the chat, what are some of your favorite subscriptions that you have that are that you have? Let's catch up on the chat here. Some favorite subscriptions. We've got lots of different categories: music, entertainment, Netflix, Crunchyroll. Okay, I like it. The more entertainment. Spotify. Oh, so close to my heart. Masterclass. The Calm app. Oh, that's a good one. Uber, Fitness, Apple Music, National Geographic, Wine Club, Book of the Month Club. Love it. This is great. Man. Oh, Audible. If I had one subscription if you said, Dave, you have to get rid of all of your subscriptions, you can only have one subscription, I think Audible would be the one that would be the last one standing. I love books, but I really love listening to books. By the way, has anyone subscribed to their doorbell? That's always a fun question. Dave, are you subscribed to your doorbell, by the way?
Yes, I am.
Would you be willing to share with the group what you're subscribed to?
I'm blanking on the name.
Oh, well, let's see what people say. Well, there's Ring is a common one. Arlo is the one we have at our
That's
house.
what I've got. Arlo, yeah. I've got two cameras, and it was mostly to track my kids coming and going.
Mostly to track your kids coming and going.
Late night.
Well, for me, I used to make this joke, by the way, at conferences, and then my wife, we didn't have one of these, and my wife said, Dave, when you travel, I don't like having to answer the door or know when an Amazon package got dropped off, and so we are now proudly giving the doorbell company $12 a month for the privilege of being able to see that a cat walked by my front door at 2 a.m. And so if you would have told me, by the way, 10 years ago, Dave, that I would be giving to the doorbell company, I would have said, I have no idea what future you are describing, but I don't think I'm interested in. In fact, 95.8% of US adults have at least one subscription. And the average adult today has 12 subscriptions. In fact, when asked, how much do you estimate that you spend on subscriptions? The average American consumer underestimated how much they spent on subscriptions by $133 a month. So that is $1,600 a year that consumers are subscribed to subscriptions that they didn't even account for. In fact, 42% of consumers said that they had forgotten they were still being charged for a subscription that they no longer use. By the way, are you in that category? I'm in that category. I literally just wrote a book on the subscription economy. And 3 weeks ago, I discovered there was a subscription that we had that I did not realize that we had. And so subscriptions are everywhere. In fact, there are entire subscriptions now, like Rocket Money, that actually you can subscribe to monitor your subscriptions and make it easier to cancel. Which, by the way, for the fundraisers and us charity leaders, your recurring giving shows up in these applications. So it will say, this is, you're giving on a monthly basis to so and so. Would you like to cancel that? And so we're seeing some convergence between subscriptions, actual convergence between subscriptions and recurring giving. And subscriptions have been good for business. The average subscription business over the last 12 years has outgrown the general market by 4 times. So that's why we're seeing subscriptions everywhere. And for many of us, that has become both a point of frustration as well as occasionally a point of joy. And this is one of the other lessons I think we can learn from the subscription economy. Subscriptions only work when people actually derive value and stay subscribed. There's a lot of churn and burn subscriptions out there that are trying to trick you into, subscribing, but they don't stay in business because, candidly, the only way they can stay in business is to actually provide a great experience and ongoing value. So the other side of the subscription economy, which is real, is that donor behavior is changing. 52% of millennials said that they would be more likely to give monthly over a large one-time donation. And for those of you that are saying, well, yeah, Dave, but the core fundraising generation is still boomers and Gen X donors. Well, 49% of all baby boomer and Gen X donors were already enrolled in a monthly giving program. And candidly, this stat is a couple of years old, so I'm sure it's over 50% today. Recurring donors are also more valuable. We know this, but let me just really put a fine point on the value of a recurring subscription donor. The average retention rate for a recurring donor is 78 to 86% versus 42% for the average multi-year donor. The average long-term value, I like to calculate it in 5 years, 60-month value, is 5 to 7 times that of of a single gift donor. Recurring donors are 6 times more likely to make a legacy gift to an organization. So this is a really great legacy giving strategy. I just did a session with a group that specializes in planned giving and planned giving marketing, as this is a massive opportunity in the planned giving space. And recurring donors are some of the best single gift donors. They're the most generous donors that will give over and above their recurring donation. I find that on average, 25%, the average donor gives 25% in addition to their recurring giving. So if, for example, you have $100,000 coming in your recurring giving program, you should be seeing about $25,000 on top of those $100,000 in recurring giving, because recurring donors are some of the most generous additional single gift donors. When there's a disaster or a year end or a specific opportunity, they often come out of the woodwork and give, and they cost less to cultivate and retain. So from 2019 to 2024, the average charity saw growth in recurring donors by 127.3%. This was just a recent study several months ago by Neon One. So this is not a trend that is coming. I'm saying, hey, there's something that's happening here in the future. This is a trend that's here today. And we are seeing that donors are more likely to become sustainers or to subscribe to services or causes they prefer. So all of that together, I call subscription giving. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that donors are becoming more consumeristic or that you need to start sending tchotchkes to your donor every month because they're paying for their giving. I'm just saying there's a lot we can learn from how the habits and expectations that we all have now, because we live in the subscription economy, that are influencing our generosity. So what do we do about that? We're going to spend the balance of our time talking about strategies to grow sustainable giving. And again, we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. I also have some resources that we'll make available to you, and so you'll have those as well. So fundamentally, the book is broken into 4 parts. The first part of the book is why sustainable giving matters. And it's more than just stable, recurring giving, but that is a part of it. The second part of the book are specific lessons we can learn and apply from the subscription economy to growing recurring giving. So I interviewed people like Robbie Kellman Baxter, who's the world's foremost expert on building subscriptions. She's written 2 books, by the way, The Forever Transaction and the Membership Economy, consults with the likes of Netflix and Microsoft and everybody. Had some great insights from her. I interviewed Amy Connery, who is the head of what is called the Subscribed Institute, which is an entire think tank built around the subscription economy. Fun fact, Amy was the one that actually coined the term software as a service, SaaS. Many organizations, many businesses, if you've worked at organizations, understand what a SaaS business is. She coined that phrase for the industry. And so we look at that in the second part of the book. But the third part of the book, and the one I'm gonna zero in on here in our remaining time, is how to build and manage a thriving recurring giving program. And so in that part, I extensively walk through 7 core steps to building and growing a recurring giving program. And those 7 steps, I have basically created a consolidated blueprint that is an accompanying guide for the book. And I'm going to walk you through 3 of the 7 steps at a high level, but I wanted to make that available for everyone. I just finished, candidly, the final draft of it earlier this week, so we're just putting some finishing touches on it. So if you want to get the blueprint, and I'll bring this up again towards the end, you can either, it's always fun scanning a QR code on a computer. There's some weird, meta version there. Or you can see the URL here, and we can drop it in the chat, www.imago.consulting/ and then AFP Global 2025. So if you want to get a copy of that, as soon as we have that, which should be here in the next week or so, we will send that to you. You'll also get information on the book, and then we have put together a guide, an assessment, that is basically 30 questions, 7 minutes to get a pulse on your own program and where you have opportunities for growth. So all that'll be there if you're interested. But today, what I want to do is just give you an overview of the 7 steps, and then we're going to dive into 3 of them very concretely. So the 7 steps to growing your recurring giving program. The first is to benchmark the program. We're going to come back to that. The second is to understand your donors, both what experience you're giving to donors, as well as what motivates and inspires them to give on an ongoing basis to your organization. The third step is to craft an ongoing value proposition, and that is so critical. That's where I think, candidly, we can learn some of the best lessons from subscriptions about this is not a one-time purchase or a one-time donation. We need to create an ongoing relationship with these donors. And what does that look like? Then you need to align your technology. We'll spend some time on that. I love the fact that Charity Engine is our sponsor today because they care deeply about building sustainer programs and providing the technology to do that. So we'll talk about that. Then design your program, grow the program, and cultivate the program. As you can imagine, the book goes into pretty significant depth on all of those areas, but I want to give you some very concrete things in these 3 areas before we're done today. The first is benchmark your program, then we'll talk about craft and align. So benchmark the program. It is really hard to get where you want to go until you understand where you stand today. And so what I recommend is answering 2 questions to benchmark where you are today. Number 1, how many? Number 2, how much? How many recurring donors do you have today, and how much are they giving? So 4 core metrics that I recommend that you, some of you will know some of these offhand, but you need to have an understanding of today, January 2025, as we record this, so that you can see where you want to go and what's possible. So the first metric is your total active recurring donors. So these are total number of donors who have given a recurring gift in the last 12 months. The second metric is the total revenue from recurring donors. And when I say total revenue, I mean all revenue, not just if Dave gives $35 a month, you're just counting the $35 a month. No, you would also include any single gifts from Dave in this example. So you want to look at from all sources. And I recommend that you express your revenue numbers in two ways. Number one is MRR, and number two is ARR. What does those stand for? MRR is monthly recurring revenue, and ARR is annual recurring revenue. So this is how subscription businesses candidly live and die on what their MRR and ARR is. And so how much are we receiving from a recurring giving on a monthly recurring basis? And how much are we receiving from our recurring donors on an annual recurring basis? Then the next number is super easy to calculate because you just basically take the total amount of recurring giving and you divide that by your total giving to get your percentage of total revenue from recurring donors. And then the reason these first three are so important is not only to benchmark where you are today, but I see too many organizations that compare themselves to charities that have been either at this for 5 or 10 years or are in a completely different vertical, and they just feel discouraged because they think, well, I don't, 80% of my donors are not recurring, or I don't have, 100,000 or 40,000 or however many recurring donors. And the reality is you don't want to compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. We're all on a journey of building these programs. And so you want to understand where you're at today and where you were as you go forward, where you were 6 months ago, and are we moving forward? The last metric that I recommend before we move on is to calculate your long-term value. Now, this one can, on the surface, become one of the trickiest ones to calculate because you basically need to look at total giving from those recurring donors over, I recommend, 5 years in the book, which means you would need to go back 5 years to donors. But long-term value is simultaneously the most important metric in fundraising, I would argue, and yet it's the least utilized and most misunderstood metric in fundraising today. There are very few good benchmarks on long-term value, and yet if you're in the subscription business or the recurring giving business, that is one of the most important numbers that you can know, which is what is the total value of this particular donor. I met with an organization, a client earlier this week, and their long-term value of their recurring donors is $14,000, which is incredible. And so every new donor they can bring into their program is essentially a $14,000 value. That might change the way you think about how we would invest in that particular program and acquiring and converting and caring for those donors to keep them around. In fact, 97% of the value of your recurring donors will take place after the first gift. That is not a made up statistic, by the way. I feel like 97% always sounds made up. It's like, no, literally, if you do the math, the average first gift approximately represents 3% of the total giving that recurring donor will give to the organization. And if you knew that 97% of your recurring giving would come after the first gift, how would that transform the way you think about, care for, onboard, and cultivate your recurring donors, right? Okay, so that's just a few of the lessons we talk about in benchmarking. In the book, I do unpack 12 total metrics as you move from kind of beginner, starter, to intermediate, to advanced. But for today and for the vast majority of our organizations, let's start with these 4, and then let's build from there. All right, the second area in the blueprint is to understand your donors. For sake of time, I'm going to skip past that. That is a super critical one, and it pains me to skip past it, but it'll be in the guide. It's certainly in the book. And we're going to move to the third, which is so critical, and that is to craft an ongoing value proposition. What do I mean by that? Well, my friends over at Next After, which many of you will be familiar with, they've really pioneered this idea of innovation and optimization in the charitable sector. Wonderful team, Tim Kachuriak and Nathan Hill are both featured in the book. And this question comes from them, and I love it, which is, The question we need to answer for our donors, specifically our recurring donors, is if I am your ideal donor, why should I give to you rather than some other organization or not at all? And there are four keys to cultivating an ongoing value proposition. And I want to illustrate this by going back to Union Rescue Mission that we talked about. When I first started working with Union Rescue Mission 20 years ago, I mentioned that the recurring giving program was designed around this idea of a meal a day. What do I mean by that? Well, a meal and shelter was the best single gift offer that Union Rescue Mission had for many social services organizations. It is that sort of immediate triage kind of meal and shelter that's the best gift. And at that time, a meal in order to serve a meal to a person at the mission cost about $1.13, I think, $1.17, something in that range. So conveniently, that had added up to about $35 a month. Well, so what they were doing was saying, hey, would you give a meal a day on an ongoing basis? There are a couple problems with that. Number one, the fulfillment rate was terrible. We had a heck of a time getting people who actually committed to give. We had 30% of the people who committed to give on a monthly basis who wouldn't actually give. And so then we had to follow up with them, and it was this whole hassle. But what we did in that time was we actually converted the program from a meal a day focus to what we would call something like a representative child sponsorship, because we knew we had so many families and women and single moms and children that the mission was serving. We would anonymize their stories, completely privacy, being careful with privacy. But then we would say each month you are helping someone like Sarah and Elijah, and we've changed their names to protect their privacy, tell a little bit of their story. When we made that transition, we saw the fulfillment rates immediately jump by 30 to 50%. And so one of the keys to an ongoing value proposition that we need to think about is that it has to justify ongoing involvement. So often, one of the mistakes I see charities make is they take their best, what I call single gift offer. In the case of URM, it was meals and shelter, and they just say, hey, would you give us 12 of those a year? Would you just give those monthly? And the reality is often your best single gift offer is not the same thing as your best recurring gift offer. So I think of, like, just to use the subscription example, Spotify, if you would have told me 10 years ago, Dave, you should pay the music company, whatever, $15 a month to rent music, I would have said, no, thank you. I have my collection of MP3s in that case. Some of you have had CD collections or tape collections, right? Why would I rent music from the music company? I want to own my music. I want to be able to access it anytime I want. I don't want to lose access if I stop renting music. So the reason Spotify is so powerful is not because you're renting music from them, although technically that's basically what you're doing. The reason Spotify justifies ongoing involvement is because it gives you the joy of discovery. Like, I constantly will learn about new artists or songs that I wasn't even aware of. I can make a playlist for my children, and we connect over a shared love of music. I can play that music on any device I own, in my car and at the coffee shop and in my office. So Spotify has really perfected this idea of what an ongoing value proposition looks like. And Union Rescue Mission, as a similar example, basically said, these are the types of stories that we're seeing, and this is the type of person that you're supporting. So that brings us to the second element, which is to describe the need in terms of survival, safety, and belonging. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think a lot of us have seen that pyramid. You've got this idea of the survival needs, or the most basic needs. We have to meet survival needs before we can meet the next level needs, which are safety, which before we can meet the next level needs, which are belonging, and then on up the ladder to the highest need, the highest idea of self-actualization. And I have found that the better charities are at articulating their recurring giving ask in terms of survival, safety, and belonging, the better their recurring program goes. And I believe that every charity can find ways to describe what they do and the outcomes of what they do in terms of survival, safety, and belonging. It's far too easy for charities to get as candidly in their head or think about, well, but what we actually do is we, dig wells, or we, ship medical supplies overseas, right? That may be what you do, but what you need to communicate to your donors is the outcome of what you do in terms of how that contributes to survival, safety, and belonging. The third lesson is to cultivate a connection with human need. That's what we did with Union Rescue Mission. Was instead of sponsoring an inanimate object, a meal or a night of shelter, you were essentially giving, and you were connected with another human who was in need, and that was a powerful lift. And then the last piece before we move on to our last area is that it cultivates a connection with donors. So not just a human connection with need, but the beauty of recurring giving is it gives you an ongoing relationship with those donors, and you can cultivate that connection. All right. We're gonna wrap up with this final piece, and then we'll move to a little Q&A time to align your technology. In the book, I describe what I call the sustainable giving tech stack. So if you're familiar with the tech stack, right, it's what are the different pieces of technology that we bring together to service our organization, or in this case, our recurring giving program. And your technology tech stack will either be the biggest barrier or the best ally that you have to growing your sustainable giving program. What do I mean by that? I mean that the technology that you have, it is not uncommon to see organizations see essentially hockey stick style growth with their recurring giving program once they really start to focus on it. And so your technology might be serving you today. Most people in most surveys with most technology tend to probably say no because of the nature of how people implement and utilize technology. But the reality is, if your program serves you today, the question I always ask is, will your program service you when you're 10x your current size in terms of number of donors going through the pipeline, in terms of your processes and your procedures and your processing? Will it work when you're 20 or 30 exercise? Because it is not uncommon to see that kind of multiplicative growth. And what you don't want to do is to have technology that essentially works for now. And maybe if we grow 50% or 100%, it'll still kind of work, but it breaks beyond that. You don't want to have that situation. So I talk about the different components of your tech stack in the book, specifically three of the most important components being your CRM or donor management system, your donation platform. So that's sometimes the same thing, but they're often two different elements. And the third, and arguably just as important as the first two, is your donation processor. And a lot of people tend to think of, wait a second, isn't my donation platform and my donation processor the same thing? Sometimes they're called the same thing, or sometimes there's two integrated pieces, but those are two separate functionalities that you need to think about. And we talk about that in the book. But we also talk about 6 keys to a sustainable giving stack. I'm going to run through these real quick and then just make some final comments. The first is ease of use. There is often a tension in technology between only one person in the organization knows how to use this thing because it is so complicated, or they built it from scratch. And so, well, it's not easy to use, but it's super powerful because we can do anything we want because it's completely custom developed. Well, for anybody that's worked in technology, you understand the dark side of that, which is, well, what happens if that person leaves, or what if another department needs to actually be able to do something? And so we want to look at ease of use. The second is customer experience. What does that technology do for your donor experience, and how does that impact the experience of the people in your that actually interact with you, your stakeholders, your volunteers, your guests, your donors, and how do we make sure that we provide the best donor experience? Third, capability. Every technology has different sets of capabilities. One of the mistakes I've seen as somebody with a digital background is you tend to just start to look at platforms and get this kind of shiny object syndrome. Like, what's the coolest functionality I needed, but is there? Um, just want to check the chat here. I see a little blink. There may have been a little internet hiccup. Let's see if we got that. All right.
There was a
Dave,
real
if you can.
short hiccup, Dave, for a couple
Okay.
seconds for me. Others might have been longer, but you seem fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let me know if it happens. Well, if it happens again, let me know when I come back.
Okay.
So ease of use, customer experience, capability. The fourth is scalability, as I mentioned. Will your technology service you and if not, how soon can you get to technology that actually will service you as you grow? Because I do see this as a growth area. The organizations we worked with have seen significant growth, and it's better to pull that Band-Aid off and deal with that now, before you get to another level of scale and it becomes a much bigger issue. The fifth area is integration. I tend to personally bias towards tools that integrate well with each other, meaning they're either from the same suite of tools or they are pre-built, very good integrations, meaning how does the data work together and can you actually trigger certain things, which we'll talk about in our last step, and what can we do with that? And then the last is automation. Increasingly today, we live in a world where we can create these wonderful systems that can help automate a lot of the journey so that we can then focus on the relationship and how do we increase that and improve that. So I know that was a bit of a fire hose here for the last 20 minutes, but just to wrap up, and if we step back and look at the broader picture, the reality is the subscription economy is here. Know that. I didn't need to convince you of that today. Second, it is reshaping recurring giving, and I hope you've seen a glimpse of that in what we've talked about today, which has enabled a new kind of subscription giving, which has led to the rise of sustainable giving. If we take just those 75% of charities that have historically been left behind, which is many of the folks on this call, and you just saw 5% growth in your individual giving area from recurring giving over the next 10 years, that would result in $119 billion additional giving to charity. And especially in light of the news, that's not the only reason this is important, but this is just such a critical opportunity, I think, facing charities today. It's why I dedicated the last 3 years of my life to all the research and writing and we didn't cover. Again, if you want to get a copy of that Sustainable Giving Blueprint or information on that Sustainable Giving Assessment, you can easily just sign up for that. I'll leave this up for a few minutes, but Dave, why don't we go to a few closing questions?
Cool. Thanks, Dave. This was fantastic. I love your delivery and the content. Obviously, people are very excited about the book and the book giveaway. So we'll be working on that as soon as this webinar is over. There was a number of questions coming in. It did glitch a couple times there towards the end. In the beginning, no issues, but in the last 5 minutes, kind of went in and out a little bit. But you're fine. Never went very long. One was there was a little bit of confusion around LTV. So what's the calculation of LTV that you were using?
Yeah, so I recommend using 5-year long-term value, which is the total giving from the first recurring gift for 5 years, for 60 months. So that is the one of the issues I talk about in the book is that there is lacking an industry standard definition. So some people will use the term lifetime value. The problem with lifetime value is it's never over, right? So if you technically say I need all the data from all the lifetime of a recurring donor, you're never going to actually know that. And so 5 years is a good measure because it captures those people that do stay longer than 5 years. The Neon One study, I think, found in their data, the average recurring donor had stayed around for like 7.8 years. I see donors that will often stay around for 3 years and then move on, which is fine too. But that's where I use the 60-month window.
Okay. Another follow-up to that one is on LTD is from Wilson is how does donor transiency / life expectancy figure in? Maybe you hit that a little bit there, but
yeah, the short answer is that's the beauty of recurring giving is it actually increases that life expectancy, so to speak. I often find that the average number of gifts you see from a recurring donor is somewhere between 35 and 45. And if you do the math on a monthly basis, that's actually kind of a low end, right? 35 would be 35 months, right? Or 45 would be 45 months. And so recurring giving does increase that.
Okay. Another question from Morgan was, should we be asking for recurring donations for event-based fundraising?
Almost, I want to say absolutely. There are some occasions where you wouldn't, right? In certain mega, donor events or like, those sorts of things. Although I've increasingly talked to friends that specialize in major donors about how to combine like big capital asks with then medium-sized. Would you give this $100,000 and then $2,500 a month for the next 3 years? So there's some beautiful recurring giving opportunities for major donors, but events are actually one of the number one channels for doing sustainer donor acquisition. I had a client just a couple of weeks ago host a local event, small organization. They have about 100 recurring donors, and they in 1 3-hour period with just a few concentrated storytelling moments ended up generating about $10,000 in long-term recurring value just from a 1 3-hour open house event. So I'm very bullish on live events.
That's awesome. Do you talk about that in the book out of curiosity?
I do. I actually have and also in the blueprint, there's 16 channels that I look at. In the blueprint, I just sort of say whether they're more conducive to acquisition or conversion. But then in the book, there's an entire section on sort of a POV, a couple paragraphs on each one of those 16 channels.
Great. Question here is from Julie. What's the best way to convert one-time donors to recurring?
Ooh, one of my favorite questions. There are a number of strategies. And by the way, I see Kendall. Thank you, Kendall. We can go a few minutes past the hour with some more questions. And I just recently wrote an article on this called The Most Important Window to Convert Sustainers. So if you go to the mago.consulting website, you can look it up. But people ask me often, when is the most appropriate time to go to a new single gift donor and ask them for a recurring gift? And is it 6 months? Is it 90 days? Is it at the end of the welcome series? And the truth, Dave, is that the most important window is the first 30 days of a new donor. Yeah. And that might feel aggressive to some folks, like, whoa, you're going to ask them for a recurring gift. But that is the time they are the most passionate about the cause. Doesn't mean they won't be passionate about the cause 6 months from now, but it means that whatever that emotional interest is and that functional interest is going to be much lower 6 months from now because it's, we all move on with life, right? And so it's what are you doing in your onboarding welcome series? And I'll just tease from the book 2 points, 2 words I want you to think about when you're onboarding new donors. Affirm and invite. So affirm, close the loop on that first gift, help them see how their gift made a difference. Affirm, affirm, affirm. But then you also need to both indirectly and directly invite them multiple times to join the community of people who are giving on a recurring basis.
That's great. The quick question is your book going to be available on Audible?
I knew it. So every time I talk about how important, how I love audiobooks, not for the foreseeable future. Let's just say that. It turns out audiobooks are almost as hard to produce as physical books. So after 3 years in effort, we're going to let this one ride for a while.
Here's a question. Do donors think of their monthly gift as a subscription, quote unquote? Is that the language? Are we hurting or helping our acquisition if we use this term?
I'm really grateful for whomever asked that question.
I didn't get
because
the first name for.
oh, it's
Sorry
fine.
on that
I
one.
do not recommend using subscription language unless there are 5%. I have a client yesterday that I was working on that literally provides newsletters and contents, and we're playing with the balance between subscription and membership language. But for the vast majority of charities, I do not recommend saying, would you subscribe to our, food bank? So there are, like I said, some occasions in more membership style programming, but I don't recommend invoking subscriptions. What I wrote the book about was just how is this influencing the way people think and decide, and then what can we do to take advantage of that? That's a really good question.
Next question is there an average recurring gift?
I will give what I've heard as the average, but with a big caveat, and that is donors are no longer anchoring themselves at what some of the traditional, like I mentioned, Union Rescue Mission, $35 a month. That was like, to sponsor a child is $38 a month or whatever. That is less and less so the case. I do have many clients that are seeing. I have one client that we ran a campaign a couple months ago, and they for converting recurring donors, they had a donor sign up for $5,000, Dave, a month. So I don't want to anchor people, but often I will say the average is often between 25 and 45 when you do the average. But that I just don't want people to interpret that as, well, then don't ask for $1,000 a month. Well, you might have a mid-level donor or a major donor that will give $5,000 a month. I had somebody come up to me after I said this at a conference, and they said they had a donor that gives $50,000 a month. Dave, I said, on your credit card? And they were like, yep. I was like, well, somebody's getting a lot of miles. My credit card doesn't go that high.
That's funny. One question here is around, do you offer recurring donors a gift or token of appreciation?
A lot of organizations do, and I'm a fan. My main recommendation is, if you have a gift, which I would refer to in industry parlance as a premium, is that it has to be on mission with your organization. So I do think it's a mistake to just give away random tchotchkes. I think it needs to be something that is very much in line. So, I've worked with an organization that provides microfinance and microenterprise for women in Africa, right? Well, then giving a beaded bracelet to somebody, that is totally on mission. Likewise, a lot of charities I mentioned do write books and have different, resources. Sending a donor a resource, that's great. So that's my only recommendation there.
We got about 1 minute, so we'll do one more question here.
Sounds good.
There was one I thought was interesting. My donor base is small and older. Our mission is amazing but narrow. Where can I find new, younger, sustainable giving prospects?
I think the age, sort of the age question, is very interesting, because I've been doing digital fundraising for not 20 years, but for about 18 years. And that's my background, by the way. Prior to being in fundraising was digital. And people used to ask that all the time. Oh, am I going to get younger donors? And it's like, well, by definition, more younger people do use digital. And so therefore, you're going to get younger donors. And I think we're going to see the same thing with recurring giving. My children are growing up in a world where they don't know anything but the subscription economy. And so as they age and become, more in their giving years, they're going to give at a higher recurring basis, which is why I think this is a long-term wave that we can ride. But I wouldn't stress about it too much today. You are going to get younger donors. But like I said, 49% of all baby boomers and Gen X donors are already giving on a monthly basis. So I'm not downplaying that idea. But I think it just sort of comes with the territory.
Great. All right, Dave, thank you so much. I think you're a great speaker. Personally, I've heard lots of speakers, and I really enjoyed your delivery today, and the content, and the book is fantastic. We're looking forward to giving out those 100 books to folks. And I know my email blew up a little bit because I saw the submissions coming in. So we'll be in touch really shortly with everyone. But again, Dave, thank you so much. And we're looking forward to the book coming out on February 4th, is it? Or
February
5th?
4th, next Tuesday. Get those pre-orders in. And by the way, if you're going to be at AFB Icon, I'm super excited because I'm based in Seattle, and AFB Icon's in Seattle this year. So come. We'd love to see you. I'd love to meet you. We're going to do a book launch reception there, so be fun to see folks. And Dave, you're speaking too, right?
That's right. I'll be speaking there. Yeah, really
Awesome.
excited. Great. Thanks so much, Dave. And thanks everybody for joining today. And thanks to AFP, a great partner of ours too, and giving us this platform and Dave the platform to talk about this topic. So thank you, everybody.
On behalf of AFP Global, I would like to thank you for your participation in today's webinar live stream. Please take a brief moment to complete our survey, which helps us program future events. Our next webinar, The Art of Financial Storytelling, Inspiring Donors Through Numbers, on February 5th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern. This concludes today's stream. Thank you and have a great day.